A flight from Berlin is set to touch down at JFK Airport in New York in the opening shot. An anxious flight attendant phones his coworker from inside and requests that she come to the cargo hold area right now. Although there are no animals mentioned on the manifest, a horrified coworker of hers in the back alerts her that there is something alive in the cargo hold. When a mysterious creature suddenly breaks through the hold door and attacks them, the female flight attendant is left confused and opens the door without seeing anything. The plane has landed on the runway in the scene that follows, but the airport staff is unable to detect any indications of life within. The 210 passengers on board have stopped speaking altogether, and the aircraft has turned off all electrical signals. Bishop phones various government departments right away to request backup, stating how dire the situation is. In another scene, Ephraim, an epidemiologist and the director of the Center for Disease Control, is shown going to custody counseling as ordered by the court. Because Ephraim puts his career above his family, he and his wife Kelly are no longer together. Their son Zach is under their joint custody. Ephraim is not happy about Kelly's boyfriend Matt moving in with her and Zach soon. Ephraim is compelled to end his counseling session at the custody hearing because his emergency-only cell phone keeps ringing. He learns about the plane when he answers the phone. He then makes a call to his younger sister, Nora, and informs her that he desires complete authority over the inquiry. Ephraim soon arrives at JFK Airport and welcomes Nora and Jim, two of his coworkers. Homeland Security wants to approach the occurrence as a terrorist strike, but Ephraim informs them that a virus could be to blame and explains the principles of contagion. His remarks eventually caused Homeland Security to back down, and the CDC took over. Two goons attempt to sell a watch to Satrakian, the shop's owner, who is an elderly man in his 90s, elsewhere in the pawn shop. The robber attempts to steal some money through the plexiglass while Satrakian bends down to examine the watch. But Satrakian grabs his wrist and points a knife at him, threatening to sever a vein. Despite having a gun, the second thug is forced to give it up by Satrakian. The thugs flee in fear of the old man. Later, after learning about the flight, Satrakian enters his basement and retrieves a sword cane. He then starts conversing with a malformed heart that was kept in a jar. According to Satrakian, the enemy has returned and is now considerably more dangerous than before. He then cuts his finger lightly, letting some blood fall into the jar. Unexpectedly, tiny tentacles that like worms emerge from the heart and begin sucking on the blood. He tells her about his court-mandated custody meeting when they are back at the airport, waiting for Ephraim and Nora to get ready for biohazard and board the plane. Nora makes mention of her friendship with Ephraim during the year that he and Kelly were divorced. As they board the aircraft, they discover everyone to be dead and unmarked in their seats. They discover evidence of plentiful ammonia during their additional investigation, but it is not toxic enough to cause death. The moment Nora activates the UV lights, they notice weird spots all over the aircraft. We observe one of the deceased passengers' hands twitching as they make their way to the rear of the aircraft. The two arrive at the cargo hold's open entrance in the following scene when they see the ammonia patches all over the place. Nora enters the cockpit and sees that even the pilots are dead while Ephraim watches it. One of the pilots, whom she is observing, abruptly awakens, stunning her to life. Three other passengers, a punk rocker, Bolivar, Joan, and a man named Ansel, also came to life shortly after. Ephraim quickly radios for assistance after spotting them and mentions that there are survivors. Palmer, the chairman of Stoneheart Group and one of the richest men in the world, is visited by Thomas, a German man with odd eyes, at the Stoneheart Investment Company. The package has arrived successfully, and Eichhorst relays a report that all four survivors have been located, while Palmer is receiving dialysis from his chief of security. Here, we learn that Palmer and Eichhorst are aware of the passengers' unexplained deaths. Everett Barnes, the head of the CDC, appears at JFK Airport and concurs with Ephraim's decision to confine the four survivors. Later, in the Q zone, Nora attempts to speak with Joan, one of the survivors. Ephraim and Nora then speak with the pilot, Redfern, who has no memory of the landing. The rock star, Bolivar, is worried about obtaining drugs while another survivor, Ansel, worries about hearing some strange noises. Jim phones Ephraim in the meanwhile after seeing a huge, 9-foot-tall box that resembles a coffin but is not on the manifest. Once it is open, they discover that it is filled with soil. Ephraim is perplexed by the building and wants the authorities to collect soil samples for analysis right away. Bishop is ranting over the phone to someone in Berlin about the box that resembles a coffin. He hears a peculiar noise all of a sudden and starts to pursue it around the cargo storage area. He discovers something throbbing beneath a cloak and blood on the floor. As Bishop approaches it, a massive beast rises and thrusts a tentacle from its mouth into Bishop's neck, draining him of all of his blood. The German, Ike Horst, sees a Latino mobster named Gus in another location and gives him the task of picking up a vehicle at the airport with a package inside and delivering it to Stoneheart. Gus initially declines, stating that it is a highly risky endeavor, but he agrees when Ike Horst offers to change his mother's immigration status and expunge his brother's criminal history. Ike Horst then gives him 3 instructions: return to the rendezvous location before dawn, avoid stopping, and don't inspect the goods. Ike Horst also provides Gus with a black business card that will allow him entry into the airport despite the tight security. At the airport, where all of the victims' families have congregated to express their outrage, an elderly man named Satrakian appears. Despite being halted by security, he poses as having a heart attack to gain access to the man and chat to him about the plane. Later, Ephraim informs the media and the relatives of the victims that there are just 4 survivors out of the total of 210 people and that they currently have no reason for this. He further says that the possibility of an unknown infection prevents the deceased bodies from being given to the family. A medical examiner video contacts Ephraim and Nora in the following scene, revealing that the deceased have non-traumatic wounds on their necks. Additionally, their bodily chemistry has been changed, which prevents them from naturally disintegrating. Instead of blood, the body's interiors are filled with a milky sludge. After some time, Satrakian, who is also present, abruptly says that the corpses must be beheaded and burned, along with the enormous casket, as Ephraim and Nora are moving to examine the aircraft. Jim and Ephraim, however, believe he is insane. The old man is taken into custody after they discover a weapon in his cane. Later that evening, the medical professional uses UV light to inspect a body and finds odd, worm-like patterns beneath the skin. In another location, Ephraim and Nora search the plane's cargo hold and discover a little worm that is wriggling and attempting to touch their skin. They keep it in a bottle and view it as a parasite searching for a host. They proceed to the security room, but the CCTV footage reveals that the coffin simply vanished without a trace. Ephraim requests that the video be paused, at which point he sees a weird thing raise the casket and vanish into thin air. Ephraim gives Jim the order to block off the airport and halt and search any vehicle that might have been carrying the coffin because the video is only 7 minutes old. Later, Gus dons his bogus ID, boards the van carrying the coffin, and the van departs. After a little while, though, the cops stop him and ask him to pull over. Jim shows up just before he is going to be revealed. Jim is surprised when he sees the business card Ike Horst gave him and releases him. Here, we learn that Jim is employed by both Ike Horst and Palmer. The corpse's malformed heart is then removed by the medical examiner. He is shocked as the heart begins to beat and shred worms. One of them accidentally falls into the examiner's hand, but he scrambles to yank it out with a tweezer. Suddenly, every corpse, including the ones that had been dissected, rose from its bed and charged at the man. Because there is no judge available to hear the case and charges have been filed, Satrakian has been imprisoned elsewhere over the weekend. Another prisoner observes Satrakian's Holocaust tattoo, which bears the identification number A230385. Returning to Stoneheart, Ike Horst informs billionaire Palmer that everything went according to plan. He does, however, suggest that Satrakian, aka the Jew, is still seeking something. The next scene shows Emma's father, who is distraught upon his return home, being shocked to see Emma at the door. She claims to be cold yet appears diseased and green. Even in her current state, the father gives her a firm hug and expresses his relief at having her home. Gus eventually makes it to an underground garage. He becomes intrigued and tries to look into the van's casket when he can't find Ike Horst. Gus is forced to flee the area as quickly as he can when the coffin begins to snarl and thud as he approaches it. Ephraim, Nora, and Jim discover Bishop's body with a broken head as they return to JFK Airport. The same white discharge and ammonia are also found. The 4 survivors decide to leave the quarantine zone and return to their family in the meanwhile. The trio refuses, despite Ephraim's warning that they are still in danger. Ephraim contacts the police since he has no other choices, and they take over. Angered, Joan calls the Secretary of Health and Human Services after observing this. It becomes clear that Palmer used his clout to use the survivors to escape. Eichhorst encounters Satrakian in another part of the prison and informs him that the master is keeping an eye on Satrakian via him. Here, we learn that the Nazi general Eichhorst oversaw the detention of the Jew Satrakian in the concentration camp. Eichhorst makes fun of him and brings up the passing of his wife as he departs. The pilot, Redfern, is encountered by Nora and Ephraim in the following scenario, where they begin questioning him. Redfern explains that government representatives loaded the package into the aircraft. Ephraim is shocked to hear this and persuades the pilot to be admitted to the hospital for a thorough evaluation. The survivors Joan and Bolivar are next seen having dinner when they begin to experience unexplainable noises in their heads. Joan rushes outdoors as her wine begins to spill from her lips. Palmer's aide tells him at Stoneheart that he has found a potential liver donor. Palmer agrees to the plan even though he believes he may not need it anymore. Later that day, when Ephraim visits his wife Kelly, she expresses her gratitude for his involvement in the investigation. Surprisingly, he extends a hand of friendship to Matt, Kelly's boyfriend, and urges him to protect his family instead of being furious. For him to be granted joint custody, he also exhorts Zach to be truthful during the custody court. The next scene shows Bolivar sharing a bed with 3 different women. His hair begins to fall as one of the girls runs her hands through it. He soon focuses on the neck of one of the girls and bites her, causing her to bleed. He orders everyone out when the woman starts to worry, but he soon begins licking her bloody trail off the floor. Under UV light in the hospital, Ephraim and Nora examine the pilot and discover the same incision in his neck along with the worms that are burrowing under his skin. Emma's father phones Ephraim at the same moment and thanks him for delivering Emma home before hanging up. The two are taken aback by this and wonder how a dead person is still alive. So, to discover the truth, they rush to the morgue. Palmer's aide transports him to the parking garage where Gus had dropped down the casket in a different location. Soon after Palmer begins to open the casket, Eichhorst also joins them. Palmer, who appears both afraid and happy, is startled when the master suddenly swoops in and turns around. When Ephraim and Nora finally get to the morgue, they discover the front desk chair has been pushed over and the phone has been unhooked. The morgue is vacant and vandalized. They use flashlights to search the area when the lights go off and discover that all of the body bags are empty. Emma is at home, sitting in the dark in a cold tub. Her dad observes that her hair is thinning. As soon as he leans in, a large tentacle emerges from Emma's mouth, latches onto his neck, and strangles him. In the next scenario, a hideous being without a nose listens to opera while donning a rubber neck and nose to hide his physical flaws, as well as a wig, dentures, and a heavy coat of cosmetics. It appears to be Eichhorst. Later, Jim, Ephraim's coworker, muses to himself on what he did in allowing the coffin-carrying van through. He goes to the Stoneheart group that afternoon expecting to encounter Palmer, but Eichhorst greets him instead. Due to the casket and the ensuing ruckus, Jim makes a threat to call the police. But Eichhorst also gives Jim's wife Sylvia, who has a rare kind of cancer, a limited treatment trial, and a money envelope. The offers prompt Jim to withdraw. Another plane survivor, Ansel, sees his condition deteriorate as his eye turns bloodshot, his teeth grow fangs, and he continuously hears a high-pitched screech. He goes to the fridge and pulls out a box of raw steak with blood as the feeling becomes too much. His wife notices him eating it with his new tongue tentacle and becomes alarmed. When Satrakian is finally freed, he sees Nora waiting for him in the following scene. He orders her to find the bodies and burn them right away, but Nora is hesitant. Ephraim and Kelly go to a custody hearing for Zach in the family court. When questioned by the judge, Zach responds that due to his dad's essential job, he should only see him a couple of weekends a month. Ephraim does not receive shared custody as a result. Ephraim screams at Kelly later for stealing his son from him. Then Vasily, a professional in pest treatment, is introduced to us. He enters an apartment to remove rats when he finds a swarm of rats streaming into the river through the city's sewers. A hacker delivers a passenger list to Satrakian at his pawn business. Satrakian starts his mission to obliterate all the bodies with Emma, the first passenger. Bolivar is rapidly aging as his hair falls out. His skin becomes gray and blotchy, and he loses his genitalia. Jim, Ephraim, and Nora learn that the pilot has vanished while they are at the hospital. They divided up as a result to search the hospital. Jim soon discovers him in the basement sucking blood bags. He turns on Nora when the pilot tries to attack him with his tentacle mouth. Ephraim arrives just in time to stop the pilot from attacking by hitting him in the head with a fire extinguisher. The pilot's head is broken, but little worms are flowing from it. Nora recalls what Satrakian said about burning the body and chopping off the head, but Ephraim wants to look at it first. Ansel's wife Anne-Marie leaves him alone to recuperate at home with their dog while she takes their children to visit his sister. She discovers her dog dead with its throat and insides pulled out when she gets home. She moves slowly to the foul-smelling outhouse. Ansel is hidden in the shadows when she finds him. Nevertheless, he abruptly appears and growls at her. He has chained himself to himself by his neck and is covered in blood so that he won't hurt her. He growls at her to flee because the voice in his brain is making him want to swallow her blood. Palmer and Eichhorst meet a hacker somewhere else and ask her to bring down the internet in return for a sizable sum of money. Jim records Nora and Ephraim as they inspect the dead pilot at the hospital. They discover new body systems when they rip him open, along with a 6-foot tentacle that they pull from the corpse. They observe that his genitalia is also lacking, just like Bolivar's, and that he has an ammonia-like odor. For the sake of his wife's care, Jim feels bad and admits that he allowed the van carrying the coffin to leave the airport. Ephraim hits him and runs off in a rage. The next scene shows Anne-Marie burying her dog and forcing her haughty neighbor into the shed where she feeds him to Ansel. In a different location, Gus and his friend Felix steal a Mercedes and visit Alonso, an unlicensed auto dealer. Felix had heard that although Alonso spends $1,000 on the automobiles, he only receives $800 in return. When Palmer collapses at Stoneheart, the doctor informs him that they have a replacement liver for his transplant when he awakens. Then, Emma is discovered in the basement when Nora and Ephraim visit Emma's home. She attacks them right away with her tentacle tongue. Satrakian enters from the shadows and beheads Emma with his silver blade as they attempt to get rid of her. As Ephraim and Nora approach, Emma's father turns completely around and follows them. Satrakian lops his head off after observing this. He then issues a warning to Ephraim and Nora to avoid the worms. Ephraim ultimately concurs with Satrakian's choice to murder the infected after seeing the bloodshed all around them. The Master is an ancient creature that feeds on its victims' blood and transforms them, as revealed by Satrakian the following morning at Emma's home. The Master, a Strigoi, a vampire as they are known in Romania, is in charge of everything. He kept 4 of the passengers alive so that the news would cover them rather than the deceased, allowing them time to return home and spread the disease to their relatives. In a flashback set in 1944 Poland, Satrakian travels by train to a Nazi concentration camp with his grandmother and brother. Satrakian's grandma warns him about the dangers she warned him about before they arrived at the camp and speculates that they will soon encounter one. Later, a camp run by Eichhorst is where the train stops. Satrakian and his brother soon begin working in the camp as carpenters. Joan awakens in the present, unwell in her bed. She looks at her daughter's neck while her children bring her food and give her hugs. The housekeeper thinks it's strange and removes the children from her room. Satrakian informs Ephraim that since every passenger has turned, he will remove them all from the aircraft. They then decide to visit Ansel's home, with the explanation that nails will make the animals vulnerable enough for him to approach and kill them. Satrakian hands Ephraim a nail gun filled with silver nails. He also reveals that those who have transformed into vampires visit their loved ones at home and kill them. Another flashback shows the Master swooping in at night to prey on sleeping inmates in the bunkers of the concentration camp. Upon seeing this, Satrakian becomes horrified and informs his brother that it is the vampire from his grandmother's tales and that silver is required to kill it. Currently, Nora receives a call concerning her insane mother who escaped from her nursing facility but was later found. The management informs Nora that if her mother walks off once more, they won't keep her at the nursing home. When Ephraim and Satrakian arrive at Ansel's home, they discover Anne-Marie has done the unimaginable. She is shown a silver mirror by Satrakian, who explains that it will vibrate if she is infected. Thankfully, it doesn't. In a note, Anne-Marie mentions where she left the kids and how she can't function without Ansel. When they enter the shed, Satrakian beheads Ansel after Ephraim shoots him with the nail gun. Additionally, he obliterates the attacked neighbor who is turning within the shed. The two then set the shed on fire before leaving for their next assignment. Ephraim sends Nora a message in the interim, requesting that a quarantine be imposed as a result of what he witnessed. Palmer receives a liver transplant and wakes up at the Stoneheart group feeling energized. He has had numerous surgeries before, so the doctor cautions him that he won't survive another major procedure. When Joan's eyelids start to develop, the caregiver gathers her belongings and brings the kids to her house. Vasily, a pest control expert, is pondering why there are so many rats being released into the river in another location. As he enters the tunnel, he notices ammonia spots everywhere and hears a large object fly by. He is suddenly approached by a horde of vampires that emerge from the shadows. Vasily flees from the tunnel, leaving its lid open, unarmed and shaken. Unexpectedly, sunlight causes burns on vampires. Nora pays her mum a visit to the nursing home. They hear screams as they accompany her to her room. As soon as Nora notices a vampire attacking one of the locals, she rushes her mother out of the area. In the following scene, Ephraim asks Everett Barnes to impose a quarantine on all of the passengers and their families after showing him the footage of Ansel. Barnes, though, declines. Jim alerts Ephraim that Barnes has video of him dragging the pilot's body through the hallways as he becomes aware that the infection is spreading at the same time. Jim assists Ephraim in leaving the building as he tries to right his wrongdoing. Ephraim removes his SIM card from the phone shortly after to prevent being found out. He begs Jim to proclaim the quarantine before making his getaway. The following morning, a guy is chained up as Eichhorst enters his white, padded room in vampire form. As he drags the man toward his feeding altar, he reels in the chain and extends a tentacle to feed on him. Ephraim observes the FBI agents from across the street and hides when they arrive at Kelly's home in the meantime. However, Matt makes a call to the FBI, and they quickly show up and handcuff Ephraim. Later, Kelly snaps at Matt for meddling in her family problems because she is upset with him. Satrakian is on his quest to exterminate the vampires somewhere else. He runs upon 6 vampires in one of the passengers' basement, and they start to assault him. He does, however, escape their grasp by ascending the basement and entering the light. He then sets the house on fire and flees. The following scenario shows Nora receiving a phone call from Jim alerting her of Ephraim's imprisonment. The FBI officers suddenly knock on her door. Nora gathers her belongings and exits through the back door after realizing that she is in danger. In a different scene, Gus runs into Eichhorst in the tunnel, and the latter gives him the task of retrieving and destroying the pilot's body parts from the hospital's basement. Gus disagrees and attacks Eichhorst, but he is quickly outmatched and forced to comply. Gus and his companion Felix are later picked up by Jim and sent to the hospital. The body bag from the hospital is soon unloaded and dumped in the river. Felix opens the sack to reveal the pilot's tentacle out of curiosity before disposing of the body. Vasily, meantime, finds his office empty and his coworkers have transformed into vampires when he gets to work. By raising the blinds and exposing them to the daylight, he fights them. Ephraim informs a coworker about the dangerous outbreak that has spread throughout New York City when he returns to the FBI's main office. Ephraim offers to accompany the FBI officers to the bodies and present them with the evidence because, as anticipated, they don't trust him. Kelly is urged, Diane, her friend, to leave the city if she so chooses. People are walking along the street, peering at the sun through special glasses because it is the day of an eclipse. Ephraim's companion FBI officers are backed up in traffic. Ephraim observes the medical examiner turning into a vampire and assaulting people from the car. When both agents notice this, they are both taken aback and step out of the car to deal with the vampire. Sadly, they are powerless against the vampire, who devours them with ease. As a result, Ephraim is left in the automobile by himself and manages to flee. Gus and Felix wander through the mayhem on the streets to avoid being attacked. A vampire appears out of nowhere and tries to attack Felix. Gus knocks the vampire's head off, and worms crawl out and into Felix's hand. When the cops show up there and detain them for killing the vampire, whom they mistake for a regular human, they try to get rid of the worm. Ephraim tells Satrakian that he is prepared to join him on his mission when he visits his pawn shop in the last scene. When Satrakian learns this, he brings Ephraim downstairs to his basement chamber, where he finds Nora and her mother, much to his astonishment. The old guy says he has a new strategy now that Nora and Ephraim are both prepared as the episode comes to a close.